every child grew up with that message and heard that message throughout their entire life, how different the world might be today. Do you ever? I do. When I hear songs like that, I think, gosh, we'd be living in such a different set of experiences and circumstances. And then I go to the place of, well, how can I make that kind of difference in the lives of the people around me? How can I be more encouraging or inspiring? Or what can I do or say that might lift somebody's spirits and bring them to a place of believing in themselves? Believing in themselves, and not from an egotistical place, but from a place of whether they would use these words or not, from a place of recognizing that they are a part of Spirit. They are a part of the One. They are a part of God by whatever name we choose to call God. And what a different life each of us would be living. And I think it's really linked to this idea, this whisper that Christina Baldwin writes about in the Seven Whispers, this idea of practicing certainty of purpose. Practicing certainty of purpose. Say that with me. Practicing certainty of purpose. She begins the chapter with these words. Practicing certainty of purpose is a commitment to figure out why we're here and what we're going to do about it. Why we're here and what we're going to do about it. When we practice certainty of purpose, we balance our personal will to fulfill certain needs and desires with an awareness that our individual lives affect the needs and desires of the larger community. There's a lot that she packs into this statement that I think is really important for us to understand and to embrace. When we practice certainty of purpose, we balance our personal will to fulfill certain needs and desires with an awareness that our individual lives affect the needs and desires of the larger community. It's a both and. It really, in many ways, is very analogous to our mission statement, our purpose statement of transforming lives and healing our world. It is the balance of our personal will, our personal needs, our personal desires, in an understanding of how that impacts and plays out in the larger world, the larger community. There was a time that I didn't really connect those two things. I didn't really connect that there might be a relationship between how I am living my life and the larger sphere of humanity. And it wasn't until, and I actually vividly remember when it first hit me, John and I were driving north on the 15. I can't even remember now. I think we had our son Jonathan. I don't think our daughter Jennifer was born. But we were listening to a book, and it was a book written by John Robbins. John Robbins was the heir, the grandson, to the Baskin and Robbins fortune. And the book we were listening to was Diet for a New America. And in that book, part of what John was writing about was the link between how we, particularly in the Western world, eat, what we consume, and how that has an impact not just on our own individual health, but how that has an impact on the resources of the world and what's available for everybody else. And in his book, he was encouraging people to just consider eating lower on the food chain. And whether you agree with any of that or not, I'm sharing it from the standpoint of it was my, my first introduction to this idea that how I live my little individual life, or however many years I get to do that on the planet, has a connection or an impact, has a connection or an impact with the larger human community. That was a really important and new concept for me. And then it was driven home even deeper when I was introduced to Marianne Williamson's book, Healing of America. And again, linking some of these ways that I am living with not just me and my family, but me and my larger community. And then shortly after that, I had the opportunity in 1999 to participate in, well, actually to help create the first synthesis dialogues with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And our trip there, meeting with him for a period of 5 days in Dharamsala, India. So you can imagine kind of all that happening to a person in the span of just a few years, really, beginning to have a different sense of my place in the sphere of things. It's the idea, I think, of our purpose, as Christina Baldwin shares in the beginning of that chapter, is a balancing of our personal interest and will and need with that of the larger community. One of the things that I've seen over the 4+ decades now that I've been part of Unity is that we as a teaching and a movement are maturing and deepening in understanding what it means to awaken spiritually. That the purpose of that awakening is not just for what it does for us individually and our families and our immediate surroundings, but what it has the potential to do way beyond us. Christina suggests that there are some challenges in knowing our purpose, and sometimes it's hard to figure it out. And maybe some of you sitting here or tuning in are in that place where, it feels kind of hard to figure it out. What is my purpose? Why am I here? What am I invited to do? What am I called to do? What am I here to do? She shares a Hasidic legend in the book, and I want to read it to you. I think it's this beautiful, beautiful legend, and I love the way that she ends it. She writes, "When a baby is conceived, an angel accompanies the soul into the womb and lives with the fetus for the 9 months. It speaks to the soul of its life to come, and they decide together on the purpose of this incarnation. What is this soul coming to contribute? Who will help support this purpose? Where comes love? What challenges will be faced? How will death find this one and bring him or her home?" And then, just as the birth pangs begin, when the soul must fully enter the baby self and the angel return to heaven, the angel reaches out and presses its finger against the baby's lip. We still have this mark, an indentation that runs sweetly from the upper lip to our nose. It is the angel's last gift. Hush, now you must forget, the angel says. And then she writes, and I love this. I remember the first time I read it in her book, it just cracked me up. "Here we come imbued with purpose and arriving in amnesia." Do you connect with that all? Here we come imbued with purpose, because we really are. I believe with all my heart and soul that each and every one of us is imbued with purpose. I also think that many of us arrive with amnesia, kind of not remembering why we're here. She writes in the book about a story with her niece. If you're reading along in the book, you may have come to this part. She writes about her niece who was at the time not quite 4 years old. And her niece, she was visiting her niece, and her niece asked her to tell her, when did we meet? Now imagine, she's not quite 4, little niece saying, when did we meet? And so Christina says, well, I was there kind of moments after you were born and in the bassinet, and they wheeled you out and I got to meet you. She says, her niece said, no, not then. Don't you remember? Did you forget? When did we really meet? What's that about? What's that about? When did we really meet? When did we really meet? I remember a ministerial colleague telling me a story about a member of his church. This goes back quite a number of years ago. And it was a member in his church, husband and wife, who were having their second child. The first child was a few years old, maybe about the age of Christina's niece, when the newborn was born. And the couple noticed that the 4-year-old, 5-year-old child was really, really interested in the new baby, and an unusual amount of interest. And so they thought this was very sweet, very loving, but they thought they better really pay close attention, because sometimes when a brand new baby comes in, there's the jealousy and that feeling, and so they wanted to make sure that their older child wasn't going to in any way do anything to harm the baby. And so what they saw happen one evening, the infant was in bed, in the crib. They were trying to get the baby to go to sleep, and the door was cracked open slightly, and they noticed that their 4-year-old or whatever was at the edge of the crib, holding onto the little rails of the crib, leaning in and saying, "Tell me about God. I forgot." Take that in for a moment. Take that in for a moment. Tell me about God. I forgot. I forgot. Could it be that she's right on with this? Here we come imbued with purpose and arriving in an amnesia. Or these words that speak to the same sort of feeling, that this same sort of idea that we've been here before. That we've been here before. Wordsworth wrote, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath elsewhere had its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home." Are those not beautiful, uplifting, encouraging, inspiring words? But trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. We kind of live in this paradox, though, don't we? We have glimpses that we are more than what we have yet done or accomplished. You have moments of that, right? You touch that part of you, that inner part, that spirit, that soul, where you just somehow know that there is even more to you, even greater greatness to you. And I'm not speaking in an egotistical, egoic kind of way. I'm speaking in a very spiritual way. That you have glimpses of that. But then the paradox is you're living your ordinary life trying to figure things out, whether it's how to get everything done in a day that has to be done, how to pay all the bills, how to move into this next phase in your life, or to figure out what it is that you want to do. And we live in this kind of state of knowing and not knowing, remembering, having glimpses, and then falling back asleep. Christina suggests that certainty of purpose starts by believing we have one. I like that. Certainty of purpose starts by believing we have one. It's like Mark Twain said, the 2 greatest days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. The day you find out why. She writes, "I pray you will be able to answer this question of why you are here. Why have you come to earth?" You know that Kathy Zavada song we sing often? To love, serve, and remember. Why have we taken birth? To love, serve, and remember. Christina writes, "I pray you will be able to answer this question. Please pray that I will be able to answer this question as well. We need each other to fulfill our destinies. The health, even the survival of the human body is at stake. We need each other to fulfill our destinies." When you do what you are here to do, you may be a teacher, you may be a healer, you may be one that encourages, that inspires, that figures things out. When you do what you are here to be doing in the best way that you can, it lifts the human body up that much more. I had the privilege of spending quite a bit of time over a period of a number of years, either in person or with prayer calls, with the futurist Barbara Marx Hubbard. Some of you are familiar with her work. I can't remember how many books Barbara wrote, Bucky Fuller called her, what did Bucky Fuller call her? A futurist. I just lost the train of thought for a moment. America's futurist. And she would often talk about the idea of conscious evolution, and that we are here to evolve not only our own consciousness, but to help through the evolution of our own consciousness to help evolve the consciousness of humanity. And how very important it is that each one of us do whatever it is that is ours to do. It doesn't have to be grand. These are words that Christina uses. It doesn't have to be grand. It only has to be fitting. What you are here to do, how you are here to be, the destiny that is yours to fulfill, is not going to be the same as mine or the person sitting next to you. That's a good thing. If we were all here to do exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, I think we would be stuck. We each have a piece of the larger puzzle to play. I have been recently re-exploring the work of American philosopher and Buddhist teacher Ken Wilber. And one of the things he's been writing about quite a bit, and I think I'll do a series on this, is the idea of integral spirituality. And in integral spirituality, he says that there are at least 4 very distinct phases that we need to go through. And the first is a phase of waking up, the idea of who and what we really are, and we are more than this physical being, this physical body, of waking up and then growing up. And he's not just talking about physiologically and biologically growing up, but growing up into emotional maturity. So we wake up, we grow up, and then he says, we need to clean up. And that's about shadow work. And he talks and writes about this not just on an individual level, but also on a community level, on a societal level, I should say. So it's waking up, it's growing up, it's cleaning up, and then it's showing up. And that is what we're talking about today. That's what she's writing about when she says, practice certainty of purpose. Even if you feel you're not quite clear or you can't articulate to anybody else what your purpose is, it can make a difference if you just act as if you know that you have one, that you are here by divine appointment. You are. You're not here by accident, even if your parents might have told you you are an accident. You're not here by accident. Maybe in their relationship there was that, but you are here by divine appointment, and so am I, and so is every other person. We are here together at this time in our evolution and at this time in the evolution of our country, the evolution of our planet, because we each have something to do, a way of being that matters, a way of being that matters. She writes, among many of my friends, we often speak of doing the work. We are dedicated to doing this work. What the work is takes different forms, but we sense a common spiritual purpose connecting our efforts. One friend is a consultant, another a clergy, a teacher, a writer, a community organizer, a gardener, a drummer, a guide. The work does not need to be grand, only fitting. I think part of the reason we get lost in the question of our purpose is somehow we think it's got to be grand. Well, there are certain people here on the planet, I'm sure, whose work is grand, but maybe ours isn't. Maybe ours is a little, downsized. Maybe the size isn't what matters, it's that it's fitting. It is guided by asking ourselves over and over, what is the next right thing to do? And when one of us falters, the other reminds him or her, you have a purpose, do your work. Rest here, find peace of mind, ask for guidance, fill yourself with certainty, then move on, we are with you. To me, she's describing a sangha. She's describing spiritual community. We come together because we're pulled together by some common interests. I think spiritual understanding, waking up, growing. I think we're pulled together because we want to do what we can, not only to have our lives work better, but we want to somehow contribute to making life a little bit easier or better for others. So we're pulled together by these kinds of things and in an attitude and an energy of support. Would you not agree? Do you not agree? Some ideas here on the fact that for some it can be a struggle to figure out what this certainty of purpose is. And I want to remind you of what a point she makes in the chapter and that I shared earlier, that one of the challenges people have is they can think it's a once and forever thing that you find. Let me go back and reread that quote because it's fitting here. Purpose isn't something you figure out once and it stays the same. It is something you live into as life evolves. It's not something you figure out once and it stays the same. It's something you live into as life evolves. There may be a common thread. I'm thinking about my own purpose. And even though the outer form of aspects of my life have changed, there is a common thread for me in why I am here. And it has to do with things like uplifting, encouraging, making a difference. But the way that that expresses itself, I notice, has evolved over time. As I've gotten older, as I've gotten smarter, hopefully smarter, as the world around me has changed, as the needs of the world seem to be different. And so there's something about it that's similar, but yet it can feel and look quite different. Does that make sense? Can you relate to that at all? I think part of the wisdom in what she's saying there is it helps us to broaden and be a little more flexible and open with this idea of our certainty, practicing our certainty of purpose. Many struggle to figure out their purpose, but don't, and maybe it's because it isn't figure-outable. Take that in for a moment. Maybe the reason we struggle is because it isn't figure-outable. When I think of the word figure-outable, point to me on yourself. Where is figure-outable? Yeah, for me too. Figure-outable is up here. Up here. I value up here. I want to take as good care of my mind as I can. I want to keep learning and growing and being informed. But I learned a long time ago, and I'm sure you did too, that this will take you only so far. And that there are some things in life that are not figure-outable up here. Nod your head if you know what I'm talking about, right? And so if it's not figure-outable up here, where is it figure-outable? Here, I'd say. In the heart, in the gut, in the soul, in the almost sometimes bodily recognition of, here I am and this is what is mine to do. Here is my next right step. Many struggle to find out their purpose, but don't. Maybe that's because your purpose isn't figure-outable, at least not from your head. We can't think our way into life's passion and purpose. We have to do our way in. Think about that for a moment. We have to do our way in. I think that implies a certain trial and error. I think it implies a certain just stepping in and trying things out. I remember when I was talking to my mom a number of years ago after my father had passed, and after the first few years of grieving over her husband, my father's passing, she was moving into a different phase in her life, her recognizing that maybe it was going to be a little too much to maintain a pretty decent-sized home all by herself, and maybe she needed to look into some other things. And I can remember so many conversations we had almost every single morning during my walk time for about at least 9 months, I think, to where I would finally say, Mom, you're not going to figure out the next step in your head. We talked about so many different possibilities. Come and live with John and me and Jennifer for a couple of months. Go and live with my brother for a few months. Go and live with my sister for a few months. got to get into it. You've got to move into it. You've done all the figuring out up here that you can do. It's taken you just to the edge of the possibilities, but you're not going to know what is right for you until you live into it. It's the same thing here. We can't think our way into our life's passion and purpose. We have to do our way in. It's like there's a time to affirm, and then there's a time to get up off our affirmations. It's a time, right? It's a time to go, okay, I've done all my visualizing, my praying, my meditating. I have my prayer partners, my practitioners, and I'm not downplaying any of those. I think all of those are tools that we use. But there does come a time when we've got to make sure that we are engaging in an action. And I think that there's a certain amount of discovering, if you will, the evolution of our purpose by stopping with the overthinking and stepping in, trying whatever seems to be the next right thing. The next right thing. It's the dropping from our head to our heart, and then maybe from our heart to our gut, or at the very least including them all and valuing them all as best we can. And then I can't remember where I read this, but I like the idea, so I'll share it with you. That has to do with figuring out our purpose, that it's not figure outable up here. We have to kind of live our way into, explore, experiment our way into it. And each step along the way, we get a little more information, a little more insight, a little more discovery of ourselves, and we can ask more questions of ourselves. What's the next right thing? Not the next 25 right things, if you're like me. But what's the next right thing? And then it's this idea of breaking up with the one. Breaking up with the one. Many of us struggle because we try to find that one thing that we're meant to do. But trying to find only one thing is the reason why we feel like something is missing. The notion that we have only one thing we are meant for limits us from fulfilling our greatness. Think about that. Think about that. Maybe it's not one thing. Maybe it's not one thing. So as I close, I just want to kind of emphasize certain ideas here. One of them being expanding the possibilities of who and what you think you are and why you think you're here. Giving yourself permission to just expand that, to let it be playful, to let your mind and your heart wander over any and all kind of possibilities that you can think of. And as you do that kind of mental movement, notice what you feel. Notice if your body responds in a certain way. Notice if there's all of a sudden kind of a lightness that you feel, or a sense of joy that you feel, or a sense of possibility that you feel. Your life will always tell you your next right steps if you're paying attention. Your life will guide you. We've been talking in this series about things like practicing peace of mind, talking about moving at the pace of guidance. It's all there. We just need to clear away the stuff that keeps us from paying attention and being sensitive to it. So expand the possibilities of who you think you are. You do have a purpose. Do your work, whatever that work is. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be grand. It only has to be fitting. Doesn't that make it easier? Doesn't have to be grand. It only has to be fitting. And Jan, as I think about that statement, I reflect on the talk that you gave about your exhibit last week and how you talked about the impact that some of your writings have had, some of your photography has had, in ways that you had no way of determining or predicting. You didn't do any of that for any of those things to happen. And then years later, you discover, oh my gosh, Gloria Steinman has one of my photographs, or this happened, or that happened. That When we do what is ours to do and keep asking what is the next right thing to do, we will make the difference that we are meant here to make. We may not always see or hear it right away, but don't ever let that stop you from doing the best that you can, where you are, with who you are, what you know, and what you have. And then, as we've talked about in previous lessons, we practice detachment. We practice detachment. Namaste.